Hello, and welcome to EverydayFI, the show where we talk to everyday people who are pursuing financial independence. I'm your host, Meghan Combs, and in today's episode, this is a Meghan's Money Musings, and I will actually be on another podcast called Paychecks to Purpose, and I am sharing that episode with you here just as a, little special bonus. So stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Blue, and this is From Paychecks to Purpose. This podcast is a diary where I talk about money, living a good life, and more. I hope you have a chance to stop by for a few minutes and listen. Hello, Meghan.
Hey.
It's good to be able to meet you and to do this collaboration. For those who may not be familiar, Meghan is the host of EverydayFI, and I'll let you go ahead and talk a little bit more about what EverydayFI aims to do.
Yeah, sure. So it's the EverydayFI podcast right now, and I interview what I call everyday people in the financial independence community and basically get their stories, because I don't feel like we hear enough from people who, don't necessarily have like blogs or books or whatever that they're selling. And, we hear from those folks a lot on how they reached financial independence. And a lot of it is because they had like famous things that they were able to do or made like side income on stuff like that. But I wanted to hear from people who were like nurses or truck drivers or, even tech sector people or doctors on how they did it. And I think a lot more people can relate to those stories. And so that's what EverydayFi does. It's morphed a little bit. I now am doing like bonus episodes that are outside of just interviewing everyday people. And I, do topics where I deep dive into things with experts and stuff like that. And I also talk about things that are a little bit more in line with my own personal views or my personal life as my EverydayFi story. So yeah, that's basically what it is right now.
That's awesome. Yeah. I just wanted to say that it was funny. I just did an episode, my most recent episode, where I was talking about mainstream media and how I feel like they just get FIRE wrong. And there was this New York Times article about FIRE, and it was really funny because they chose this person who just didn't really have a relatable story to be like the highlight. He was like fat fi and had sold an app and like retired at like 25. And I was like, that is like nobody's story. So I don't know why you're picking that person. But anyways, it was just...
it's because it sells, it
does,
clicks,
yes,
it sells.
It does get clicks.
Yeah.
Anyways, but yeah, so I will for anyone who may not be familiar or may be new, I am the host of From Paychecks to Purpose, which is a podcast that talks about things at the intersection of money and living a good life. And, that can take a whole host of different formats, but I like to do with collaboration episodes, either like a specific topic or an interview where we kind of have a two-way conversation about going from paychecks to purpose and also like, how do we live a good life? So yeah, I'm excited to get into it with you today. I know a little bit about you because I've, listened to EverydayFi and I've, seen the interviews. I know like I watched the one where Mitch interviewed you. So I have some basis, but yeah, I'm excited to dive into it more. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds great.
So in order to start, we usually start these conversations with like highlights from our childhood. It can be about money, but it also can just be about like experiences that you had that taught you a life lesson or like shaped how you view like how to live a good life. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to just dive in, or do you have a specific question you want to ask?
I don't have a specific question right out the gate. I figured you could just, start with whatever comes to mind first for you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up mainly with a single parent household, single mother household. And I think what shaped me the most about that experience is that, she had to have a lot of the responsibility on her shoulders. My father and her, when they got divorced, for some reason in the divorce, he didn't have to pay child support or anything. I think it's because she got mainly all the assets, but regardless, he didn't have to pay child support. And so she basically shouldered the burden of all of our financial everything. And yet she was still very career driven. I was born in the 80s, and so was my brother. And so, you can imagine, like, and my parents got divorced when I was 3 years old, so like 1990 basically. And so in the 90s and early 2000s, like women working in the corporate world was not exactly fun. And so she had to put up with a lot. And the way that reflected in my childhood was like basically, I don't want to say absent parents because that sounds like they were being, doing that on purpose, but basically just parents who weren't there all the time. I didn't have like a stay-at-home mom who raised me. We were usually in daycare. Like my brother started daycare when he was 2 weeks old. And so we were in daycare. And then when school started, we would be in after-school programs, and we would always be the last kid who got picked up because our mom was like, I have to do this job the best that I can, because if I don't, they might put a man in my place, because I have to work twice as hard as any man does. And so it's like, that's how I grew up, and I never wanted that for myself. So I would say I'm a driven person, but I wouldn't say I'm a career driven person. I'm more of I want to design my life the way I want it to be driven person, if that makes sense. And sure,
No, I
like
get that,
having having a paycheck, of course, is part of that, but having a career that you love could be part of that too, but I never really found that. And so once I started realizing that, like, hey, going down this, career road or this corporate road is not only going to not get me happiness, but maybe actually deter or detract from my happiness. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to be like my mom, and not in a bad way. Like, I don't want to be in that situation if I have the control and the ability and the privilege to not be in that situation. She didn't have those options and I do. So that's kind of the main theme of my childhood that I remember, that's like kind of money and career related. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. I know, like, specifically for me, my mom basically was also very hardworking. Both my dad and my mom worked, but my mom, she worked at a convenience store basically her entire career, and she was the immigrant. My mom is Korean, so she, moved from Korea, and my understanding is basically she did it partially because her father was sort of abusive to like the rest of the family. And so basically she was sort of like the eldest daughter that got the rest of the family, like her mom and her siblings, like out of there, and then came here for a fresh start. So came to the US. So yeah, I mean, she didn't really like ever get to go beyond just like working at a convenience store, if that makes the most sense. But I know she used to work, like the amount of hours she used to put in between taking care of me and just working at the convenience store. Like, I can't imagine myself like replicating that for very long. It was just like crazy what she did. And yeah, she basically only became like stay at home when she got sick, which my mom got sick, unfortunately, relatively early from cancer and died when she was pretty young. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm really sorry.
I mean, I think for me, definitely, I have a lot of admiration for, the amount of work she put in. But like you, I also feel like I would like to, if I can, design my life in such a way that it does feel more sustainable and I can do the things that, I want to do and have this sort of like sense of balance. Or, even like I think about, frankly, like her lifespan, right? And things like that. And I also feel like I want to design my life in a way that I can do the things I want to do. Like, I don't know, like, how long my lifespan will be, but I want to do the things I can do in the moments, right? And she did some of that. Like, I learned some really good lessons from her. She liked traveling, and her and my dad traveled, like, a fair amount before we were born and when we were little. Like, I went to a bunch of places when I was pretty little, and that was, I think, one of the most valuable things she could have done, because she really valued travel, and she got to do that, when she wouldn't have been able to do that later on, right? So, yeah. That's definitely one of those lessons learned, is like, you need to find the balance of enjoying your life now, with saving for the future. You don't want to just save for the future and work a bunch, but then not be healthy later on to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, having a story like that, like, I bet that really drove you to, really look at like, what am I spending my time doing right now, because like, I mean, your mom's relationship to yourself, you don't know if you might get sick too when you're young. Like my mom got cancer pretty young as well. Luckily she was able to get through it, but my doctors are like, we're going to start doing, mammograms early because your mom had them. And I'm like, oh crap, really? And they're like, yeah, we'll probably start in a year. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay. So it makes you really think like, okay, is the life I'm living right now, if I were to get cancer and like my life was shortened, would I be happy with it? And so, yeah, that's a really poignant story. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, obviously it's kind of dark, but I think like a fair amount of people in the fire community have some sort of story like that. And it is definitely something, and I think they think about things a little differently. And they're not afraid to break the societal mold about like having to like stay in your job and only take 2 weeks of vacation every year till you're like 65. And I think that's really important. Yeah. I mean, and by the way, on the medical thing, yeah, I mean, for me, it's difficult because it's like, it's not just my mom, it's my grandmother too. Like she had a situation and she passed fairly young, relatively speaking. And there's like an actual medical condition that I have that's like, so like I'm getting early monitoring too. And I have like some decisions I have to make. And it's like, it's kind of a lot some days, but at the same time, it definitely gives me this like clarity, I think, that maybe other people my age don't have, Yeah. And I'm lucky that things are evolving a lot, like in terms of medical technology too. So I think like the outlook for people 30 years from now is going to be like way better than it is for me today. And even me today versus like my grandmother, like it's a lot better. Like there are actual things I can do to help prevent, things that killed them. But yeah, anyways.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically one thing that I noticed in, listening to your interview was that, I know you had a single mother, right? And you kind of like thought about things a little differently, maybe about like how you would want to live your life. And, not that like we can ever be perfect, right? But I think for both of us, like partner choice was something that we really like, paid a lot of attention to and wanted to be very intentional about. And I just, wanted to throw it out there if you wanted to talk about it. I know on my end, like, I definitely wanted to be very careful about who I chose, to marry, with the idea of them being like a true partner and, somebody that like, would carry equal weight and that I could, we could be a team. And I'm like newly married. I think it's been like literally 2 years in October. But okay. Yeah, I was just like curious. It seemed like you found a good person on your end too, because I've listened to EverydayFI before.
Yeah, I have. And I'm even more newly married. I'm just a year in this past February. So yeah, I was one of those people who, and I don't know where this came from. I actually do think it came from the fact that my mom really didn't have a lot of serious relationships when I was growing up. She, like I said, my dad and her got divorced when I was 3 years old. And after that, she would go on dates here and there, but I think for her, it was probably kind of a struggle to date as a single mom and with like a career and stuff. And she really didn't have a serious relationship until well after I had moved out. And so I think part of it was like, I just saw modeled for me a single, strong woman. And so that's what I kind of became. And so for me, there's this line by Elizabeth Bennet, and I have no idea if it's like in Pride and Prejudice or if it's just in one of the movies, but she says, only the deepest love would persuade me into matrimony. And that's definitely how I felt about it and feel about it now. And so like, I was okay being single if I didn't find the person that I wanted to find. And I don't want to say a list, like I'm not really into like lists of characteristics, but it's more like, I want somebody who respects me, who sees me, who is a partner and believes in our equality and equity between each other. Like, I don't want somebody who has or like cares a lot about gender normative roles. Like, and I want somebody who is, ethically and like morally aligned with me as well. And like even politically aligned with me. And so there were all of these things that, were deal breakers. Like I wasn't going to be with somebody who like, why, just for the fact of being with somebody. No, I was fine on my own. So I was actually convinced for a very long time that I would never find anybody. 'Cause like I dated men for maybe a couple months here and there. And like, it never really worked out. And they always tended to be disappointing or like had issues or something. And so yeah, I was convinced that I would just be single. And it's not that I like just gave up, because I was still doing the dating apps, which is where I met my husband. I met him on Bumble. Dating apps do work, y'all. And so, and I just was thinking to myself, like, if I find somebody, great. If I don't, that's fine too. So, and then I met Chris, and it was kind of funny because, I had met a few people before who I was like, ooh, this might be like a really great relationship. And then it was not. And I was like, I totally kidded myself. And then I met him and I thought the same thing. I was like, this could be a really good relationship. And then it really was. And so like, it was kind of funny. And I will say in the beginning, I, was like, I think I've met the person for me. But I will say I had felt that way before about people and then changed my mind. With Chris, I didn't change my mind. It like just kept getting better and better and better. And sure, there were like hiccups here and there, but they were small hiccups, like seriously, like ridiculously small hiccups. Not even like, I wouldn't even call them hiccups, just like a fight here and there. And it wasn't even like, I think we've had like 2 fights our whole relationship. We've been together 5 years. So, and I will say, I forget who it is, but somebody coined or said first, but a lot of people say this, like the best financial decision I ever made was the person I married. And that is so true. And it's not just like because I married Chris, my net worth doubled, which is true, but also just he is financially extremely responsible and, aligned with me. He wasn't on the financial independence path, but when I talked to him about it, he was extremely open to hearing about it. And I think there was like one little tiff we had because he had like a financial planner who was like a friend from high school at like Northwestern Mutual who like tried to sell him a whole life insurance policy. And I was like, dude, don't buy that. And he was like, he kind of got a little defensive. He's like, he's my friend. He wouldn't sell me something that was bad for me. And I was like, yeah, but he might not know how bad it is because his boss's boss's boss is trying to make him sell it to you. And he came back like a week later and he was like, I thought about it and I want to hear more about it. So that is the kind of person Chris is. It's like he might push back at first, but then he'll come back and be like, you know what? I realize that you know a lot about this and I want to hear more from you. And, I do the same thing with him with like science and stuff because he's a microbiologist. And I don't know, it works really well. So that was probably a really long answer. Sorry.
No, I totally
husband.
get it. No, I'm super glad that, it seems like you're very happy. And yeah, that's awesome. I know on my end, I also met my husband through a dating app. So they do work. I agree. Yeah, my husband and I, like you, I think I was sort of the person who's like, well, if it happens, it happens. And what really was sort of a game changer for me was that when I got into the dating phase, especially after college, I was really busy in college. I got like an engineering degree. So it was literally just like, the entire time I was just busy studying. But after I graduated, I had a little bit more free time. And like one of the reframes, I guess, that really like helped me was that realizing that it was sort of a numbers game and that like most women apparently go on an average of 50 first dates before they meet the person they're going to marry. Like that to me was like, yeah, to me that was really reassuring.
It was a lot more for me.
There's some people like that it's closer to like 100 or something like that. So that's just an average. But
I did meet my husband when I was 34. So like that's probably why.
But yeah, for me at least, it was like, okay, the vast majority of these aren't going to work out. You know what I mean? And it's just a filtering, process in some sense. But yeah, no, I definitely, very much love my husband and agree. Like a lot of the things you pointed out, like he wasn't on the fire path originally, but he was very on board, also financially responsible. Like we don't really have, much to say in the sense of like money arguments because he's just already sort of like naturally not much of a spender. And so am I. Like that's sort of like my general tendency. So we kind of align on a lot of things just off the bat. But
that's awesome.
Yeah. In this effort of trying to keep this within an hour, I'm going to go ahead and pivot to the next kind of section, which is career. And, I know you've had an interesting journey with career. So I just was curious to kind of hear you recap that and get into it a little.
Yeah. I mean, for the longest time when I was younger, I was really into art and making art, and I wanted to major in visual arts. And my family was like, how are you ever going to make money as an artist? And I was like, okay, I'll pivot to art history then. Because I don't know why I thought I could work in a museum and then that's how you make money. And that's literally what I thought. And so I have 3 different degrees because I went to a 2-year college first. So I have an associate's and then a bachelor's and then a master's, all in art or art history and museum studies. And so that was my first career, and it was also my passion career. But it's so funny that you asked this because I was literally thinking about it this morning in bed, which is it's so funny. Sometimes, I don't know if your brain ever does this, but it'll go back to like past mistakes you've made and just ruminate on them and be like, why did I do that? And I'm like, it was 10 years ago. Why are you thinking about this right now? Anxiety brain.
I get that.
Yeah. And so I probably could have made it if I was a little bit more mature. I was an extremely, I think, immature 20-something-year-old, like more so than I think some 20-something-year-olds are. And I thought I could push limits further than I could. And so I think if I was a little bit more responsible, then I probably could have made it. But I will say, if I had, I probably wouldn't be here and married to my husband at the same time. So like, it's kind of interesting, but that's what I did in New York City. So in New York, I moved there to get a master's degree in 2010, graduated in late 2012 with my master's, and basically from there tried to get a full-time job at a museum. I had a part-time one as like a visitor services associate, so basically the front desk person at a museum, and then did some volunteer coordination work as well, but all part-time. So nothing was ever full-time. And I could not break into the field. And because this was like, as I said, 2012, 2013. So basically once the economy started trying to bounce back, right, from the Great Recession, which was like really bad. You know, people think about the pandemic and like, oh, there was a recession. That's not even close to compared to what the Great Recession was. Like, it basically got rid of so many jobs. It dumped a ton of extremely skilled people into the market who I was then competing for jobs with. And then other people wouldn't leave their jobs for 30 years in the museum world. And so, and then they paid you, $20,000 a year and required you to have a master's at least, if not a PhD. So it was just like a really rough field to be in. And I ended up working at a gallery for 2 years, which was great, but it's not the same as a museum. Galleries are very business money focused. Like, they're using art to build their wealth versus like museums also are, but they do it a little bit more subtly. And they're more about collection and education and like, preserving cultural history versus like galleries are like buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. So it was a little bit less fun for me. And so I basically turned 30 living in New York. I was living in my living room with a curtain for a wall, and turned 30. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Like, I didn't have very many friends. I couldn't like keep a boyfriend. I'd been in therapy for about a year and I'd never been in therapy before. And I was like, I need to change. I need something to change. And so I decided to completely quit everything, move back in with my mom, and do a coding boot camp. And that's how I got into tech. And I won't go into that whole story because it's super boring. It's not as interesting as the art history stuff. But I basically did that, became an intern, full-time intern at a software startup. They hired me on as a QA engineer. And then I became a product manager, and then kind of just moved companies. And every time I moved a company, my salary went up, and it went from, I started at 55 in that career and went to 150, 152 before I quit this last January. And now I'm a barista. So
yeah, the next chapter, the barista-fi chapter. That's pretty cool.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I will say, if anybody's like, oh, how did you like pivot into the tech field? Can I replicate it? I don't think it's replicable the way that I did it now, like doing a coding boot camp and getting hired on because of AI, and they're also shipping a lot of jobs overseas of like junior engineers and stuff like that. So I would not try that route. I did that almost 10 years ago, and so I just don't think it's the same anymore to be able to do that.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely think AI has changed the game, and I would be more cautious, especially about something that's sort of like software engineering-y, I would be cautious about that.
Yeah, being a product manager, I mean, if you want to do that, I don't think I could really say how to like pivot directly into product management, but that is a career that's definitely still there and still valuable and pays a lot, but it is a lot of responsibility. I mean, these are the kinds of jobs where you're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week because you're always on your phone. You're just always on your phone. like meaning like on Slack or something, you're like answering questions or having to talk to customers or like something. So just beware.
Yeah, it's interesting, because so just to talk a little bit about my career journey, I basically, this is gonna sound like I'm bragging, but I'm not. I'm just like was generally like semi decent at kind of everything, like at least in school. And then I was like, didn't really know exactly. Like I didn't really have a singular thing that I wanted to do, right? And I basically kind of got gently pushed towards engineering because they're like, you're smart enough, you can do it. And then, now I feel like I definitely get some meaning and some purpose from my current job. There are things I like about it. There are also things I don't like about it. But like overall, like if you had to rank, there are some surveys that they ask people about their work, and 3 is like, I'm okay with my job. A 1 is like, I really hate my job and I want to quit tomorrow. And 5 is like, I really love my job. I would say I'm like a 3.5 on average most days, which is like pretty decent.
That's pretty good. I was a 1 for like the last 6 months of my job.
Yes, so. It sounded like your job got very difficult, which always can happen. It can happen to anyone. That's why I think fire is important for, even if you're like, oh, everything's going fine, But yeah, the situation with me is that I sort of, got kind of pushed towards something and I found some meaning and some, pros about it and stuff like that. But there is always a part of me that was sort of like, well, what if I did something different? Or like what, if I could just live in a vacuum where money was not a concern, like what would I kind of gravitate towards? And I've been thinking about that thoughtfully for a while now. And so at one point I asked people who I thought liked their jobs, like what jobs they did and things like that. It seems like from like multiple people, the project manager position is very dependent on the company. Like there's some companies, like I know at my company, I would not want to be a project manager. Let's just put it that way. But like at certain other companies, maybe it's a little better. I don't know.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to make it very clear that product management is very different from project management. So I bet all of the product managers out there are like, no, that's not the same. Very different jobs, very different jobs.
Yeah, I think I might have misspoke.
No, it's okay. Yeah. Product management is like basically where you have a product and you are the CEO of that product. Like it is your baby. You are the one who has to come up with the ideas. You have to come up with the features. You have to talk to the customers. You have to talk to the UX people. You have to talk to the developers. You have to launch it. You have to measure its success. And you have to do it all over again for the next feature for that product. Project managers are more like, hey, we have a project timeline. Here's resources and budget and how to allocate it. Very different. It can be part of a product manager's job to manage a project like that, yes, but product management is way bigger in scope than project management. Sorry, it always makes me be like, no, they're different. So
no, I get that.
Thank you for letting me say that.
You were a product manager. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And that makes sense. Like I would say like at my company, I think the title might say project manager, but realistically, I think they're more like closer to what you were talking about. It's like hardware, not software, so it's a little different. But yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of responsibilities but there are, again, some other places where maybe it is more like a project manager, where it seems like some people do genuinely like have a good relationship with their job. So I don't know, but I looked around at a bunch of different roles and kind of just decided that it wasn't enough of a motivation for me to switch, because it was sort of like, I think I was falling into like a grass is greener on the other side sort of a thing. Like I don't think it would have been that dramatically different. But I have been thinking more recently and kind of I'm experimenting. I'm in an experimental phase with finance coaching or financial advising sort of things. And the idea is that I'm kind of trialing it to see if I would potentially like it. And like that may be a future option for me. So that's kind of my like, if I was going to pivot and there was things I would do, even if like I find that endlessly interesting and honestly would do it probably if I wasn't getting paid very much at all. So like that is something that I could see myself doing in the future as like a pivot if it made sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had people ask me that question too. Like, what would you do if money was no factor? And I was like, and I asked them, I was like, are you asking me this as like, this is what I should try to find as a job? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, because that's different than like what I would do if money was no factor, because everything I would do, you don't get paid for, you know, reading, taking a bath, gardening. Like, nobody's going to pay you to do any of that stuff. Watching Netflix. Sorry, I love watching Netflix. I don't care if people judge me. I love it. Nobody's going to pay me to do that. And so I was like, I don't think there's anything that I would be tasked to do to be paid for that I would enjoy doing as much as like things that I wouldn't be tasked to pay. Like, if that makes any sense. Like, I can't think of anything that I enjoy doing that somebody would pay me for. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I actually have tried to define these different things. So phase one is like, it tends to be lower paid, and there's a lot of just exhaustion, a lot of long hours, a lot of being on your feet. You're not getting paid like all that much, relatively speaking. Some people do that, you know, like my mom worked for a convenience store, like for her career and things like that. So some people do it and they make it work, but that's what I call like a phase one. There's like a phase two where it's like big shovel job, basically. You're making a lot of money, but you've also got all these other trade-offs in terms of your time, you know, work-life balance, all this other stuff. And then I define a phase three as you want a job that gives you more flexibility, but you still want to pay the bills. That's what I consider to be a phase three. And then a phase four is literally just like, money is no object. You could just do nothing, right? But if you were like, I'm just going to do something for fun and I don't really care about the money, like I kind of described an example as like, you're like, I really like this museum, so I'm going to go be a tour guide for this museum and just work like 10 hours a week just doing tours or something like that, you know? Or I'm going to like just do something that I genuinely find enjoyable. Yeah. Don't really care if I get paid.
That's kind of the barista job a little bit. Like, it's not 100% enjoyable, but it's definitely more enjoyable than like any other job that I've ever had. That's why I went back to it. If I could work in a museum, that would be great. But the issue that was around 13 years ago is still the issue today. Like, finding a job in a museum is almost impossible. Also, those tour guides are all volunteers, just so you know. They don't get paid. So
yeah. Well, you know, they definitely get that could be the case. And I guess that's a testament to the fact that it's probably a phase four, because they're just like, well, I don't really care if I get paid. I'll just do it anyways.
Usually older folks, retired. They've got like a nice big degree in it or something. Yeah. That, I mean, I would love to do that too. But yeah, the barista job is probably the phase four for me. And then the software job was phase two. I've never had a phase three. I'd love to, like, the phase three kind of sounds like the best one. It's like, hey, I have flexibility, but I need to pay the bills, but probably that job is at least a little bit more enjoyable than like a phase two job. It kind of sounds like the best one to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that like in the future, if I do plan to make that pivot, that would be more like a phase three job for me, the financial coaching or advising. And then like right now, I would still consider myself to be a phase two, although I think I'm in a better phase two place than a lot of other people are. But yeah, I mean, I specifically define phase three versus phase four because I was like, I just need to find some way to differentiate things, because at least for my situation, if I were to pivot, at least in the like relatively near term, I would have to do something that paid the bills, which would mean that it would have to be above a certain threshold. So anyways, that was like helpful for me to kind of like think through like what my actual next step options could be. But yeah,
I think that's helpful probably for your listeners too. Just, I mean, it's helpful for me. So I think my husband is probably in a phase three job right now, but he's being paid like a phase two. So he's got it really good.
Yeah. That's the dream. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know you're doing barista. Is it sort of like an experiment, would you say, at this point in time? I know, like, you're also gonna try to have kids, right? So maybe is it going to be like a when you have young kids kind of a thing?
Yeah, so I mean, my husband and I were talking about this. So the whole reason I even like decided to do the barista job at all, that wasn't the plan when I quit my corporate job. My plan was to be focused on being pregnant. And unfortunately, the embryo transfer I had in December didn't work. And then there was like a very long time before the next one. So the next one's actually in less than 2 weeks. It'll be May 28th. But there was a long time between the two that I had to do a lot of testing and treatments and things like that to combat the reason why the first one didn't work. And so during that time, I just felt kind of like listless and purposeless. And I was like, well, instead of trying to like do things that, are just filling my time, maybe I can get like a part-time, easy, you know, enjoyable job that makes me at least feel like I'm contributing something to the household. And it's funny how that goes, because that really wasn't the plan. Like we saved the money to basically bridge the gap in the income that was lost from my paycheck, because I know this sounds weird, but so I was saving so much money that the income that was lost for paying our actual expenses was actually not that much. We put so much in savings that it was like our expenses were like, let's say $5,000, and our like entire income per month was 10,000. And so we were putting away 5,000 and spending 5,000. And then when I walked away from the job, the income dropped down to 4,000, right? Because we decided to just stop saving at this point. And so that $1,000 is what we needed to make up for every month. And so we just had it in savings, and we were just going to pull from savings. Now the barista job makes up for that. And so we don't have to pull from savings anymore. And that's kind of what I was aiming for, is like something that was 2 to 3 days a week, super low key. I purposely went to a local coffee shop down the street from me, literally 4 minutes, something that doesn't have a kitchen, doesn't have anything more than just coffee and pastries that get delivered every morning, like something that's super easy, low key, 6-hour shifts. And yeah, you're kind of tired on your feet at the end of the day, but it's really not that big a deal. And it was something to just give me that purpose. But, something my husband commented, he's like, yeah, we'll see how long this lasts. Like, it's not forever. Obviously, he's like, I'm not sure you're going to be able to do this in your third trimester. It's like, that's a lot of time on your feet. I was like, that's true. But the thing is this company is so good that they might make accommodations for me. They might be like, hey, you can go to 3-hour shifts, or you can sit for your shifts, or whatever. Like, and, once I have a child, I don't know if I would go back, but I might. Once they are ready for daycare, I might be like, hey, I'm ready to come back. I know it's been like a year, but if you guys have a position, my kid's in daycare part-time, I'd like to work when they're in daycare, because I don't know if I want to be a full-time stay-at-home mom. I think I'd like some time away from the child, and to, let them have a daycare experience and like, be around other kids and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. So yeah. I don't know if they answered your question, but
no, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking of having kids myself in the next 5 years or so, and so have been thinking about that whole situation. And I actually asked some fellow fire people about it, and it seemed like most people said, you're not going to know whether you want to be a stay-at-home mom or whether we don't want to be one until it like happens, and then you're going to like be a lot more sure about it.
Yeah. I think it also depends on the phase in your kid's life too, because I have some friends who, one of them is a stay-at-home mom, and she was like, she has a toddler, and she said when he was a baby, it was great, because babies are relatively easy. Like, if they sleep well. If they don't, they're not. But if they sleep well, they're pretty easy. Once they get to be toddlers, they get into everything. You literally have to watch them 24/7. She's like, that's when it got hard. That's when I wanted to start putting him in daycare and like going back and doing some sort of work to kind of basically pay for the daycare. Like, that's what you work for. And to have some like separation from child, which
right,
I know it
right.
sounds bad, but it's like, it's true. I mean, that is a lot of work to like watch a little tiny human like 24/7 so that they don't, murder themselves. So yeah, I would also like just think about it that way too. It's going to depend on their time in life, when they're in school and not in daycare, and you don't have to pay for daycare, and you're just doing like a public school and you don't have to pay for anything. Why be home all day? Why not do something? Is kind of my thought process is like, but I would like to be the kind of mom that's home when they come home from school, and I can like make them a snack or something. I don't want to be like my mom where they have to go to after school programs and then I pick them up at 7:00 at night. I would much rather like have them home and like do activities with them or something. Anyway, I'm now getting like looking at my future and like getting a little misty eyed, like, oh, I can't wait for that to happen. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I definitely feel for you with the IVF journey. I definitely understand that that's like a huge, arduous process. And, it just takes a long time. And that's before you even get pregnant, right? And then once you get pregnant, there's a whole other set of things to think about. But yeah. Again, wishing you the best, because I know you're like in the middle of the cycle. Yeah.
Yeah. You can call them cycles. Yeah. just in the middle of all of it. Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
So on the career section, like I definitely think we're both on the journey, in some way or another. Probably neither of us have reached the end of the journey, but I think we're both being very thoughtful about like how we think about things. And yeah, it's nice to hear your story, because so many people are sort of like me in the sense that they basically got sort of nudged into the tech space or whatever originally. And then it was like, well, I did this, but like, what if I did something else, kind of a situation. Whereas like your journey, I think, is much more relevant to other people who, have had these different phases. Like, my husband, he's also had this journey where he's kind of made different pivots. And I think that's going to be more and more people as like we go on, especially like with all the AI stuff and stuff like that. And so I think it's just valuable to hear from people like you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. And the last bit I had, I think we've got about 10, maybe a few extra minutes, is about just like, how would you define living a good life? And like, what do you, do to try to live a good life? Yeah.
Ooh, that's a broad question. Yeah. I mean, I think everybody's philosophy on this is probably a little bit different. And for me, I guess if I look at like, there's some things that resonate with me and some things that don't. And I think one is, I forget who it is, if it's like Tim Cook or somebody. And it's so funny because I don't like to like quote, tech dudes about things, but this was one thing that I resonated with. And I don't know if it was actually him, but it was somebody who said, when you look in the mirror every day and you think about the day ahead, if too many days go by where you're not happy with what you have to do that day, then it's time for a change. And that's the kind of thing that I look at when I look at my life. Like if I'm getting up every morning and I'm dreading what I'm about to do that day and it's my everyday, then there's something that needs to change. And so, and whether that's like something physically that needs to change, like in my environment, like I need, for example, waking up one day in New York and saying, oh my God, I'm 30 in New York City living in my living room. Like this needs to change. Like that's a physical environment that needs to change. Or if it's something inside me, one of my biggest fears is like having this child and then like hating it, like I've heard that parenting can be very hard. And like, what if I get a very hard baby who doesn't sleep through the night and it's awful? The thing that needs to change there would be something inside myself, like, just making sure that I can persevere and do this and get through this phase. And so that's kind of how I approach living my life. And it's not so much so that it's like everything has to be, rainbows and unicorns all the time. But I do think, like, why live in a situation that's unbearable, or even if it's not unbearable, even if it's just like uncomfortable most of the time? Your life is so short. Why would you do that? Why not try to go after things that make you happy, and content, I guess, is a better word, because being happy is like, it's hard to sustain that at all times, but being content every day, like looking at my calendar, and now that I don't work anymore, most days I'm like, this is great. This is what I want to be doing today, and I'm not sitting here like, oh my God, I'm so excited for this day. Like, it's going to be the best day ever. Like, that's not how life works, right? The best day evers are supposed to be, fewer and further between, because that's what makes them the best days. If every day was like that, then you would never remember any of your best days. So, but like looking at, today, doing this podcast, and then after this, I'm going to my writing class, which I really love to do. And then after that, I don't have any plans on the calendar anymore. And that's like 4:00. And so I get to basically choose what I do for the rest of the day. And it could be, going to a yoga class. It could be going and getting food with a friend. It could be having dinner with my husband. It could be taking a nap, So I don't know. That's how I approach life, is just like, I try to remain adaptable to the situation I'm in, but I also am okay with turning the page if that chapter is no longer working for me. And I give it some time. I gave like the art history career, I gave it time to work, and I tried really hard, and it was less that like I was no longer wanted to try at the end, but more I had a realization about the career I chose that I hadn't known before. And with that new knowledge, I was like, I now know that I don't want to do this anymore. So, and I think it's okay to change if you get new information and it no longer serves what you're going for. And, it was sad and it made me feel a little bit like a failure, but I did it anyway. That you can have those emotions and still change what you're doing. So, yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that is definitely really important, like being adaptable and kind of like thinking about that. I agree. Why be miserable? If you're miserable every day and, like this is another thing, I was talking about this in my recent episode about how mainstream media misinterprets FIRE. They keep saying like, oh yeah, I saw multiple people define FIRE as like picking a high income job, even though it makes you miserable, and then just trying to stick that out for like several years until you like can leave work altogether. And I was like, I think if you asked anyone who's actually in FIRE, if you were miserable in your job, they would tell you get out of there, like they would, and like maybe you save up like a little runway so you can, leave, but like don't wait until you have enough to fire. Like that would be crazy. Anyways.
Yeah. It's almost like they've never listened to like Choose FI, which is the biggest podcast in the space. I mean, when you listen to Brad, he's like, I never maxed out my 401k once. Like he was an accountant, and sure, he was an accountant at like a big firm, but like, it's not like he was like a lawyer or a doctor or something. And he reached FI in his 30s or whatever. And it's like, no, you don't have to do that. And also they're not mutually exclusive. You could have a high paying job that you also enjoy.
Right.
There are people like that out there. And I think, for me, I only ever had a high paying job for less than 2 years, it depends on what you call high paying, but like most of the time I was making around $50,000 or $60,000 the last 10 years. Like that's how much I was making. And yet I got to where I am by just thinking differently about my life and not buying a $40,000 truck. I have a friend who's also a biologist, but he works in I forget the different spaces, but basically there's like the private space and then kind of like the public health type of space. And of course, like that space is going to pay a lot less. Like I think he makes like half of what my husband makes. And he bought like a $40,000 truck. And he was talking so much about how like, how much he loved that purchase and why he did it. And like, you could just tell he was trying to defend the decision to do it. And I'm like, I'm cool. If you love that truck, that's awesome. But you can't sit here and say, I'm never going to get to where you are because I don't make enough, and then make a decision like that. Like, they don't fit. Sorry, bud. Like you can get to where we are. You just have to make different decisions. Also, if you want a pickup truck, you could just buy like a $10,000 one. Like they still do the same thing. It's still a pickup truck, So I totally agree. Yeah.
And just to kind of go back to the how to live a good life from my perspective part of it, my biggest focus is have fun, because I grew up in a situation where I wish that my mom, like she did get to do some things. I'm really glad she got to travel. But, my mom worked. She could really work, but she worked so much. I still wish that she had had some more fun, basically, And like looking on myself, I never have a problem like finding something to do. Like, they're like, oh, what are you going to do when you retire? I'm like, I guarantee you I'm going to find something to do that is going to give me purpose. It doesn't have to necessarily earn any money, but I'm not going to be sitting here just watching TV all day forever. You know what I mean? Like maybe I do that for a little bit and then I'm like, all right, now I'm bored. I'm going to go do something else. I'm not concerned about that.
I was just going to say I'm busier than I've ever been in my whole life without a job. Like, and not counting the barista stuff, because like that's 3 days a week maximum. I like my days are full, but they're not full of like just meetings. They're full of things I enjoy doing. Right. Yeah.
But like, I guess for me, the key thing that I think I really need to focus on is that have fun portion, because I know myself and I know I'm the type of person who can really sacrifice a lot and then not like focus on the having fun part. So that's my biggest thing when it comes to living a good life, is I want to try to intentionally do things that I find fun to insert it into my life. And do that and spend quality time with loved ones, because, that's important. And, you never know how much time you have with them. So it's good to value it now while you can. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think for now, what we might do is wrap up the general kind of like overall structure, but I did want to ask you about money with Katie, diabolical lies sorts of things.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So yeah, basically I haven't met like anyone really who's been super into Money with Katie or Diabolical Lies, and you're like the first person. So I was like, okay, we have to talk about this a little bit. I don't know.
It's my favorite podcast, is Diabolical Lies. One of them, one of three. Yes. Yeah, I think it's funny because people are like, oh, I loved Money with Katie, her older episodes when it was more about money. Now it's more about politics. And I'm like, I don't think you can separate the two, y'all. Like, money and politics are extremely intertwined. And I think it's just that people are uncomfortable to talk about politics because they're worried that people don't agree exactly with what they might think, or vice versa, and so they think a fight's gonna ensue. But I think if you keep it offline, like, I'm not online. There's the phrase that's like always online, but I'm like, I say I'm obstinately offline is my phrase. I'm not on any like social media, so that helps. And so when you have actual dialogue with people IRL, like in real life, you're not going to get the same kind of vitriol that you do online. And so I think that's what people are afraid of. And I don't think there's anything to be afraid of. I think it's okay to talk about it. My next bonus episode on EverydayFI actually is going to be about why I think we should pay our taxes as a FI community, because we try to skirt that a lot. And I think people, get really bogged down on like, oh my God, I'm paying all these taxes and it really sucks. And I'm like, but does it? Because does it really suck? Like, where do you think these taxes are going? What are they paying for? They're paying for teacher salaries. So is that really that bad that you're paying a teacher's salary? Like, that kind of thing. So anyway, I'm diverting. Do you have an actual question? Do you want to ask me? Sorry.
I don't have an actual question so much as just wanting to like hear kind of like what you like about them and like us share. I know like from my end, I really appreciated the later Money with Katie episodes because they really did open my mind to like the actual practical alternatives that exist in terms of like policy for, like how we can make basically like our country better, and it made me a much more informed voter. So now when I go to the voting booth, I feel like I'm like, okay, now I actually understand like what are the reasonings behind like what these different people on the spectrum are saying. And like, I really truly can like 100% be confident in my vote for XYZ person because I'm very educated on their policies or proposals. And that was not something I could necessarily say with as much definition before, So I definitely appreciate that. And then, Diabolical Lies is sort of like a different lens and it's a little more like...
Very liberal.
But it is still, I think, useful.
And if anybody's listening to this and is like, what are y'all talking about? So Money with Katie is like Katie Gaddy Tossian's original podcast. It was sold to Morning Brew. She actually just bought it back and put it on hold because she is now doing another podcast called Diabolical Lies, which is much more of a political podcast. And with her and the other host, Caroline Burke, who actually just released a book, they're two very different types of thinkers who are talking about a similar subject. And so Katie kind of approaches things from like an economics point of view, and Caro approaches it from like a social point of view. And they will pick a topic and then one of them will like educate the other one on it and the other one will react, which I kind of love those kinds of like dynamics in a podcast. And I really like it because it's like just them. And so it's way less produced than like the Morning Brew shows. Like I cannot stand like overproduction of podcasts. I like just two people talking, very clean, like no sound effects, no none of that stuff. Like it annoys me. They do some sound effects that are funny, but that's about it. And it is something that like there are certain like cultural movements happening right now that I would never have known about without them. And it's something that, yes, it is definitely a very far left-leaning podcast, but I call myself a very far left-leaning person. And, the economics point of view that Katie brings definitely is something that I think a lot of people could really take advantage of to learn, where we're not just individuals. We are inside a system, and learning about the system we're inside of is extremely important. And I think it could help to show that, yes, we have autonomy, but there is also this systemic thing that we're inside of that we have no control of. And like you said, that could probably influence how you vote because that's the only control we have over the system is how we vote. And I think the other side, the far right, tries to say that every single thing that's happening that's wrong are individual people's responsibility. And like, I highly disagree with that. And I think that's what kind of could open people's minds is like, yes, I'm individually responsible for some things, but there's actually this system that I'm a part of that I can only influence in this one very specific way. And I only vote for the president right now. Maybe I should vote for like local government and things like that, because that actually can move the needle and in my own little bubble. So yeah, that's why I like listening to it. Plus they're freaking hilarious. I
They
laugh
are
out loud
very
every
funny.
single
Yeah.
time. They're so funny.
All right. I think that's the end of my general conversation today. Again, appreciate
Awesome.
your time. Thank
Sure.
you for joining me. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Paychecks to Purpose. If you enjoyed it, please leave a review on your podcast player of choice. It really helps other people find my podcast. Also, if you would like, you can reach out to me on Instagram at From Paychecks to Purpose. Thank you.